UFC 309, Jon Jones versus Stipe Miocic is an utter disgrace to the sport. And not only that, it just keeps getting worse by the day. There has been a fight cancellation, a meaningful fight cancellation. And on top of that, there is a rumor that Michael Chandler versus Charles Oliveira, the co-main event, will be canceled as well. We're going to discuss whether or not there's any merit to that later in the video. But I want to take a look at a social media post from one of the UFC's partners that I find absolutely hilarious. We're going to absolutely crap on UFC 309 some more because it's one of the worst fight cards I've seen in a while. And we're also going to take a look at Stipe Miocic's interview with MMA Fighting, where he really just solidifies my belief that he will not be fighting Tom Aspinall, win or lose. And we're also going to discuss in this video what happens if Stipe Miocic beats Jon Jones. Because I've been seeing a lot of people, praying to the MMA god, Stipe Miocic beats Jon Jones. I think that would be the worst possible thing for the heavyweight division. But let's jump right into it. I want to take a look at something I saw online. This is a screenshot of UFC on TNT Sports. And it says, 10 days to go, Jon Jones, Stipe Miocic, legacy on the line. They post this poster. And if you don't pay attention to it, you might see, oh, that's just a normal UFC poster. What's so unique about that? Well, someone took the UFC poster and tweaked it a little bit. And if you look at the actual text here, 2 years of inactivity, most days without a title defense, will not fight Aspinall. And then 4 years of inactivity, most days without a fighting before a title shot, and will not fight Aspinall. Now, they have since deleted this post, but I thought this was absolutely hysterical that they accidentally posted that, because this is one of the worst title fights in UFC history. And I'm not saying that it won't end up playing out and being a semi-decent competitive fight, but the fact that you're doing Jon Jones versus Stipe Miocic, it's just abhorrent. And I'm so glad for a change. And sorry for my voice. I've been sick over the past couple of days. For a change, most of the fans are on my side with this one. I feel like I'm in the majority for a change because Jon Jones, I went and did the math, okay? Jon Jones' last fight against Cyril Gane was on March 4th, 2023, 613 days ago. His previous fight before that against Dominic Reyes was on February 8th, 2020, 1,733 days ago. So at least he has one fight within the last 2 years. But let's take a look at Stipe Miocic. Stipe Miocic's last fight was on March 27th, 2021. That is 1,320 days ago. And by the way, that was a loss. He got brutally flatlined and folded like a lawn chair. Fight before that, his last win in the UFC, August 15th, 2020, 1,544 days ago. And we're having them fight for a title? That's what we're doing nowadays? I mean, seriously. 2 years inactivity, 4 years inactivity, most days without fighting before a title shot. We're giving a guy a title shot coming off of a loss. And the loss was almost 4 years ago. That is absolutely insane. And it just seems like the UFC gives out more undeserved title shots than deserved title shots anymore. And I know, you can look at Jon Jones' resume, and here's Jon Jones' resume, and he had so many title defenses at light heavyweight and whatnot. Oh, he's the GOAT of the sport. Okay, fair enough. And then you look at Stipe Miocic's resume. Oh, well, he's the heavyweight GOAT. I mean, this dude fought DC once a year for 3 years straight and then got brutally flatlined by Francis Ngannou. And I understand that his resume speaks for itself. But at what point do we kind of disregard your resume when it comes to credence for a title shot? Are we going to give Tony Ferguson a lightweight title shot because of what he did in 2015, 2016? Is that what we're going to do now? That's the equivalent. And I don't even know where Stipe's at. And I actually feel bad for Stipe because at the end of the day, he's going to take this opportunity. But it's like, who wants to see this? I certainly don't. And I'm sure it'll be a fine fight. And who knows, it might even be exciting. And Dana White will be like, I told you so. But the fact that we got two guys who are relatively inactive fighting each other for the heavyweight title, and then Dana White trying to shove it down our throats like it's the best fight ever. Meanwhile, you have Tom Aspinall waiting in the wings as the interim heavyweight champion. The fight everyone wants to see, Jon Jones versus Tom Aspinall. It's a shame. It truly is a shame that we're not going to get that fight. And you know what really drives me nuts? And, say what you will, it's not Dana White's fault. It is the Dana White's fault. It's not the UFC. It is the UFC's fault. It's Ngannou's fault. It's Jones' fault. It's Stipe's fault. It's Aspinall's fault. Whoever you want to blame, okay? The fact that right now we have Johnny Bones Jones, we have Tom Aspinall, we have Francis Ngannou. Okay, forget about Stipe. He hasn't fought in 4 years. Okay, he hasn't won in 4 years. Again, how many days was it? His last win was 1,544 days ago. Okay, Jon Jones, Tom Aspinall, Francis Ngannou. That'd be a hell of a heavyweight division. Instead, none of them are going to even fight each other, because I truly do believe that Jon Jones is going to retire after this fight, win or lose. If he loses, we're going to get to that in a second. And if Stipe wins, I believe there's one possible option if he does win other than retirement. I believe that Stipe will retire. And that's what brings me to this. Let's take a look at the Stipe Miocic interview that he did with MMA Fighting. Let's listen to this. He's asked about, was it ever considered for you fighting Tom Aspinall? Listen to this.
I know we heard rumors that after Jon got hurt, UFC, Dana White had said very publicly, we didn't want to disrespect Stipe by saying, hey, step in on a short notice opponent. Was there any thought in your mind at that second, man, I still want to fight? Or was the Jon Jones fight just so enticing you didn't want to risk that?
By the way, shout out to MMA Fighting for finding an interviewer that speaks Stipe Miocic's native tongue, okay?
I want to fight Jon. That's always wanted to do. And, don't get wrong, Aspinall, he's a great fighter, but I just want to fight Jon Jones.
By the way, I can't take credit for that. I read that in the comments of this interview, but I watched this entire 21-minute interview. It was tough to watch, but he only wants to fight Jon Jones. It is what it is. Again, I don't blame Stipe, but he only wants to fight Jon Jones. Then we skip ahead in the interview, and he's asked basically, could this be your last interview? By the way, look how grumpy he looks right here. And listen to this.
Preparing for this one, is there a world where this is the final time we see Stipe Miocic?
I think every fight I always remember my last one. I always thought every time after my first UFC fight, I said
So I thought every fight could be my last one. This is my first fight. I think about retiring after every fight. I'm just translating for you guys. I don't think Stipe's planning on sticking around. He hasn't fought in 3.5 years at this point. You think he cares? He'd rather go answer phones at the fire department, save cats out of trees, put out fires. That's what he wants to do. And if that isn't clear enough, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit, save you guys some of the pain to listen to this interview. Listen to this.
Could you imagine going out in a better way than beating Jon Jones?
When I do beat him, I go out. It's going to be great.
That seems like...
Could that be any clearer? Could that be any clearer? Listen to this one more time.
You think about accomplishments, not to say
And when I say could it be any clearer, if you understand the words, I don't want to sit here and make fun of Stipe Miocic's, speech. But what he's saying here is pretty clear what his plan is.
We want you to retire, but could you imagine going out in a better way than beating Jon Jones? When I do beat him, I go out. It's going to be great.
When I do beat him and I go out, it's going to be great. He has every intention. He's already checked out, in my opinion. He has every intention on beating Jon Jones or trying to beat Jon Jones and then retiring afterwards. And that brings me to this point. I've seen a lot of people say, I hope Stipe wins. I hope Stipe wins. I hope Stipe wins. I have a terrible fear, boys. If Stipe wins, you know what I think is in the pipeline? I think it's going to be Johnny Bones Jones versus Stipe Miocic 2 for the heavyweight title. If Stipe wins, you're telling me Dana White's not, as much as Dana's been sucking off Jon Jones, he wants to get this one loss, this one blemish expunged from Jon Jones's record. You're telling me Dana White's not going to say, Jon Jones has never lost a fight. He's never really lost a fight. And, he lost to Stipe Miocic, the greatest heavyweight of all time. The least we can do is offer him a rematch. And then what do you do with Tom Aspinall? And at the end of the day, the UFC is going to do what's best for business. And I think a Stipe Miocic, who's coming fresh off a win against Jon Jones, who's never lost before, that rematch is going to be too big for the UFC to risk with any other fight. So what they're going to do is they'll probably have Tom Aspinall defend his interim belt again. Now, there is a chance Stipe just retires. Stipe strikes me as the type of guy that maybe isn't as lured as easily by money, but that's going to be a big money fight. And if you just beat him, why wouldn't you want to take it again? Oh, I just beat him. Let me beat him again, catch another big paycheck, and then ride off into the sunset. So I have a sneaking suspicion if somehow Stipe Miocic is able to pull it off, that it ends up, with a rematch. I mean, could you imagine that? Can you imagine that? It's going to end up being a rematch, I'm telling you right now. If Stipe wins, that's what I'm predicting. I do believe both guys retire, specifically if Jones wins. Jones, I can see eventually coming back, maybe not right away. Here's what I see Jones doing. If Jones wins, he's going to retire, relinquish the belt. He's going to see what happens in the division, and then I see like a year or two from now him coming back for a big paycheck. no matter who's champ. It could be Tom Aspinall, it could be Cyril Gane, it could be Marcin Tybura. If Marcin Tybura gets that belt, Jon Jones come back immediately. Hell, I might even, enter the UFC heavyweight division at that point. But I do believe both guys are going to retire. I don't believe either guy is going to immediately fight Tom Aspinall. To put it in Dana White's words, Tom Aspinall isn't owed anything. He doesn't deserve anything. I don't believe that, but that's what Dana White said. And I think the UFC, I don't want to say they're protecting Tom Aspinall because they're not, but they'd rather Jones and Stipe retire than potentially have Jones beat Aspinall and then leave the heavyweight division in absolute shambles. So I really truly believe no matter what happens in this fight, we held up the heavyweight division for 2 years now, and basically they're just going to retire afterwards. Now, the next thing I want to discuss is some fight cancellations, because we do have an actual fight cancellation. Azamat Murzakanov is out next Saturday versus Nikita Krylov in New York. This was a great fight, boys. This was in the light heavyweight division. This was a contender fight. Not number one contender, but this was a fight that was really going to have a new contender emerge in the light heavyweight division. I mean, Nikita Krylov, say what you will about, he's been inactive, okay? But if he beats Azamat Murzakanov, he's a guy that you could look at and be like, okay, this could be the guy to beat Pereira because he has excellent grappling and submission skills. And this was a fight that was on the prelims. I recently did a video called UFC 309 is a disgrace to the sport. And I talked about how this fight should be on the main card. This is an incredible fight. 14-0, Azamat Murzakanov versus Nikita Krylov, who's been around forever, has some quality wins within the top 10. This was going to be a banger matchup, and it ends up getting canceled. It sucks. I mean, the card itself, the main card is dog shit. You got Chris Weidman, who just eye pokes and eye pokes and eye pokes, and he's a dead body already, against Eric Anders. Don't care. They moved that to the prelims, it looks. Oh, yes, they moved that to... My prayers have been answered. My prayers have been... Yeah, Chris Weidman doesn't deserve to be on the main card. He deserves to be on the prelims after what he did against Bruno Silva. Anyway, the main card, Mauricio Ruffy versus James Hontop, I think is how you pronounce it. That's actually much better than having Chris Weidman on there. But then you have Bo Nickel, Paul Craig. Bo Nickel, definition of a hold me back guy. Spoiled brat by Dana. Fighting the dead body of Paul Craig. Then you have featured fight on the main card, Viviane Araújo versus Karine Silva. That's featured fight. I mean, this is a decent matchup in the women's flyweight division, but featured fight? I don't want to go off too much. And then you have Charles Oliveira and Michael Chandler, which we're going to talk about here in a second. There's rumors about that fight potentially being canceled. Let me just say this right now. If Charles Oliveira and Michael Chandler 2 is canceled, I'm going to drop to my knees. I will be absolutely devastated. And at that point, how bad is 309? It'd be Jon Jones, Stipe Miocic. What would they put as co-main? My guess is they'll put Bo Nickel, Paul Craig as co-main. That is UFC in 2024. Bo Nickel versus Paul Craig as co-main if Oliveira Chandler's off, which I do not believe it's off, but we're going to get to that in a second. But yeah, this card isn't that great, especially with this fight being canceled. Prelims are pretty decent. I believe David Onama, Lucas Almeida is canceled as well. That was recently canceled. I'm not 100% sure on that. But yeah, UFC 309, this is one of those cards where the UFC puts a perceived star at the top of the card in Jon Jones, and then basically they don't care about the rest of the card. It's a 2-fight main card, which, isn't great at all for a pay-per-view. And the UFC this year, it just seems like we get one stacked pay-per-view and then shit pay-per-view after shit pay-per-view. Now, in terms of the co-main event, Oliveira versus Michael Chandler, I believe it all started with this right here. Oliveira quoted a tweet and said, from Upfront MMA, which is some bullshit news website, Michael Chandler versus Charles Oliveira 2 at 309 is reportedly in jeopardy for undisclosed reasons. The UFC are desperately looking for a replacement opponent for Charles, 10 days out. Now, this is just a bullshit news account, but sometimes these news accounts hear a little grain of salt here, grain of salt there, and what they do is they tweet it out in hopes that if it does come to fruition, they can kind of get some credibility. So that's where it makes me nervous a little bit. Well, it seems that this tweet, combined with the fact that Charles Oliveira then quoted it, started an uproar in the MMA community. You have Renato Moicano. Chandler or Charles out, call me, I fight in 10 days, time is money. You have Dustin Poirier saying, I'm in. Now, let me just start off by saying this. If by some chance Charles Oliveira pulled out of this Michael Chandler fight, Michael Chandler's career is worse off than I could have ever imagined. Could you imagine if Chandler's left without an opponent on UFC 309? Or even worse, they're like, okay, we'll give you Jalen Turner on short notice, or we'll give you Dustin Poirier on short notice. Could you imagine that? for Michael Chandler. He goes from fighting Charles Oliveira, where a win there, at least he has somewhat of a credibility to claim, oh, I'm number one contender, especially if Islam beats Arman. But could you imagine the place that his career would be in if he got pulled from UFC 309? Because he's already been out since November of 2022, where he got finished by, I believe that was Dustin Poirier. I can't remember. I think it was Dustin Poirier was his last fight. I'm not going to look it up right now. But if he loses this fight, and when I say loses, I don't mean actually lose the fight, but if it doesn't materialize, he's been waiting on Conor for 3 years. He left his family in early January of 2024 for a fight that never happened at a mythical weight class. Conor McGregor has more sexual assault allegations than wins in the last 8 years, and seems like he may never come back. And then imagine if he finally gets a fight booked against Oliveira, he finally decides to move on, and then Oliveira pulls out. But imagine even worse. Imagine Chandler pulled out. Imagine he had a serious injury. That'd be the end of him for sure. But the update we have, I didn't believe this to begin with, but I just want to cover it because I know a lot of people are going to ask me. It's going to drive me nuts. I do not believe this fight is in jeopardy. But what did Ariel Helwani have to say about it? This is what Ariel Helwani had to say on his show. I will keep wanting to call it the MMA Hour, but it's not the MMA Hour anymore. This is what Ariel had to say on his show about it.
The state of the Michael Chandler Charles Oliveira fight, which is happening supposedly next weekend here in New York City at Madison Square Garden. Woke up to a couple of tweets saying that the fight was in jeopardy. Then saw a tweet from Renato Moicano saying, put me in, coach. Then saw a tweet from Charles Oliveira with the thinking emoji, quote.
So we're just going through all the tweets that I just showed you, basically.
Tweeting one of the tweets saying that the fight was in jeopardy. Then saw a Dustin Poirier tweet saying, I'm in. Based on the conversations that I've had, the fight is not in jeopardy. I don't know if there's smoke to the fire. Right now, I reached out to Chandler's team and was told news to them.
So there you go. It's news to Michael Chandler's team. By the way, where there's smoke, there's fire. Shout out Dan Hooker for those unsubstantiated claims of IV use by Islam Makhachev. And I told you guys there would never be any evidence that would, rear its head. There would never be a smoking gun. All they did was say, oh, where there's smoke, there's fire, and make an unsubstantiated claim. But let's continue.
I reached out to a couple people, and they said news to them. Now, typically when something like this happens, there does seem to be smoke to the fire, unless it's one of the crazy, fake, Twitter things. But as of right this moment, I have not heard that the fight is off. If it would be off, this would be devastating, obviously, for Michael Chandler in particular, because he's waited so long. It'll be 2 years since his last fight, the McGregor saga, all that. And then some. Hopefully it doesn't happen. I don't know how Dustin Poirier would jump in on a week's notice. I don't doubt that he would want to, but would that be smart? I don't know. But as of right now, it does not seem, let me just check my phone here. It does not seem like it is in jeopardy. I don't know where this originated. Does anyone know? I saw a couple of accounts here or there, but nothing really, it didn't seem like anything really concrete or reputable.
That's what I've seen. I've not seen anything concrete or reputable. I believe ultimately it's most likely still on. There is always a chance. And if so, maybe the UFC could do like Dustin Poirier and Michael Chandler as the headliner for UFC 310. I don't know that they would do that. I think this is just basically some bullshit news that some fake Twitter account pushed out and then everyone fell for it and started pushing it. But man, UFC 309 is already horrible. The main event, I already broke down why I absolutely hate the main event because of the inactivity, the undeserved title shot. And then on top of that, it just got worse, man. The cancellation of Nikita Krylov, Azamat Murzakanov. If you're a true hardcore fan, you know that this fight actually hurts the card. This was one of the better fights on the card outside of the co-main event. So it just sucks, man. UFC 309, maybe I'm just being a Debbie Downer, but I'm just not looking forward to it. If anybody feels the same way as I do, and Jon Jones is one of my favorite fighters to watch all time. Favorite fighters to watch. I don't endorse everything that he says, or does. But it just sucks that we're getting imagine how much I wouldn't care what the card looked like. Imagine we were getting Jon Jones versus Tom Aspinall. But instead, the card just gets progressively worse. And if somehow Charles Oliveira versus Michael Chandler ends up canceled, I don't even know if I can stomach ordering that card. So let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And thank you so much for watching.